So now Jen's going to come up and talk about timelines and roles of the board in future decisions. Jen?
Okay, everybody's here because they know that we do have a deficit problem. And that needs to be addressed, it needs to be fixed. However, we need to address it or address fixing it within a prescribed framework. There are dates that have to be followed and rules in terms of what role the board can play in working toward a solution to this budget problem. So here we've got the next few months that are ahead of us. And because this seems a little bit fuzzy, I'm going to read this to you beforehand so that you can see what it is. Here we have a CTC contract, SEIU contract, District 15 fiscal year, District 15 budget, and a P8 contract. Can everybody read that?
No, it's a bit blurred.
No, it's a bit blurred. Okay, well, so there I read it for you. I hope you can remember what it said there. That's a little bit better.
Yeah.
Even I can see it a little bit better.
I'm just going to land on my glasses.
Okay, all right. So, so we have a lot of things to consider when we're working toward a solution. Two things that I want to talk about in terms of the role that the board plays is they have a couple of different types of decisions they can make. One is an independent decision, and another is a negotiated decision. And there's a pretty big difference between those two. The independent decision, or you could call it a unilateral decision, a straightforward decision, might just simply be a vote on a budget, okay? Here, they have to control the budget on non-mandated or non-contractual expenses, okay? So, in other words, what I'm saying is the board can make decisions on things which are within their control. For example, they can make decisions on things such as band, orchestra, newsletters, whether to print them or not, class sizes, school plays, whether to have them, how often to have them, etc. Types of decisions that are examples of what they can't do is they can't modify something like an ESL program, or they can't eliminate it. That's something that's mandated by either the federal or the state purview. They also can't make a sweeping mandate about union wages because that's a negotiated decision. So in March, the board has to address the deficit problem with the only options that they can or are able to use at that particular time. Now, why are we making budget decisions in March? Speaking of time, they're making these decisions at this point in March because of a couple of factors, actually I think multiple, but two that we're going to focus on is the fiscal year ends June 30th, and you can see that one right up here. The other thing is that Illinois statutes require advanced non-retention notice a certain number of days before the end of the school term. So that also drives the need for budget decisions, so budget actions can take place soon after that to meet those requirements that again are made by statute. So there's certain certain requirements that the state has, that the state's asking them about. So the board is forced to make tough budgetary decisions in March about the 2012-2013 school year without really knowing what is going to come about in the this contract that's expiring there and that contract that's expiring there when it actually comes to a final negotiation. So now, again, I talked about the roles of the board. One is to make independent or unilateral decisions, and the other is to make negotiated decisions. They will be, after this March meeting, and possibly they're doing some research or some initial contact now, they'll be working toward a negotiated solution. In this negotiation, I don't think there's a prescribed number of board members that do it, but maybe 1, 2, or 3 board members will meet at the negotiating table to discuss what modifications possibly will be made. Then they will take, and that's a closed door session, that's closed to everyone. Then they will take that information and they can bring it back to the board as a whole, and that board is 7 people, discuss it there, and then, take a vote on it, and majority wins. So again, there are 2 negotiated contracts which come up, which I already mentioned. One is the SEIU contract, that's comprised of the custodians, and the other is the CTC contract. That is the teachers, the name for what we call the teachers union. So we have the timeline we need to work within. We have a independent decision that can be made in with regard to the budget in March. And then we have this kind of gray period where the negotiation is going to be taking place behind closed doors. Now, kind of a final step that's going to be taking place in this whole process is that when the negotiations are completed, the board then can address possible changes that can be made to maybe reverse some of the budgetary actions that had been made in March, okay? And depending upon the timing of when the contract is finalized, this could determine how quickly or extensively the reversals could occur. For example, Citizens for Accountability, we put forth a proposal as to different ways we thought that the budget problem could be addressed. And one of the things that we proposed was a freeze. But you have to remember that the board can't vote for a freeze or mandate a freeze or force a freeze. The board can only vote on certain factors affecting the budget. A freeze can only happen with negotiation. And that's if that is what the solution is anyway. So just wanted to try to, frame the process that's going to be coming ahead in the next month so that when you do read things in the newspaper, they seem to make sense within the time frame that's prescribed.
I thought that they were saying in prior meetings that the teacher's contract expires in June. Because the last meeting that I was at, Thompson was saying he hopes and expects a new contract to be in place by June or July.
Well, that would be the best of all possible worlds. If that actually happened, I would do the biggest happy dance on the planet.
Well, no, I'm saying,
Because
but he's saying, I think maybe it's just semantics, but I heard him say that the contract
That would be-
expires at the end of June. So you're saying it's at the end of August.
Well,
And
the SEIU contract expires at the end of June, and the CTC teacher's contract expires at the end of August. So, and then, there's contracts that, come in the future and we have other contracts with other expiration dates in future months and years ahead. If a contract was negotiated in June, and if there were, if some savings resulted in some of the modifications from the contract, that would be fabulous, because then more changes and more potential for reversal of some of the changes that had to be made in March could possibly occur. If the contract is finalized at a later date, that'll become more difficult. Okay, so we have independent decisions, we have negotiated decisions, we have a particular time frame, and there's one thing that I wanted to just finally frame this whole thing out within, and that's talking about our history within District 15. The 2 previous negotiations that we had in 2009, and then going back to 2006. 2009, the negotiation was finalized in June, and in 2006, the negotiations were finalized or completely ended at the end of October. So the teachers were working without a contract for those number of months. Yeah?
It is the teacher's contracts that you're referring to, not any other.
Yes, that's a great point. Thank you for clarifying. These 2 contracts that I'm talking about specifically here which is the largest portion of our budget, those two contracts are just the teacher's contract, or the CTC contract, when these were finalized. But I just want to give you some circumstances around each of these contracts. The 2009 contract that was finalized in June, relatively little was known about this contract, and when the final vote was taken, it was taken in a small room with a little less than 10 people present in the room. The 2006 contract circumstances involved it going all the way to October. It was highly publicized. It was on the front papers of a lot of the different newspapers we have, and we had a very high attendance in the gym. The gymnasium at Walter Sundling is where the meetings had to take place because there were so many people attending that. So it can really take on a different flavor just depending upon the circumstances of what's happening in the community at the time. So to end, what I want to stress is that in all of this framework that these decisions have to be made, what it really comes down to is those 2 or 3 representatives that are sent into that room, into that closed-door session, that have to negotiate those final numbers or parameters or deals or whatever. Those people are very important, and they bear the responsibility for much of the negotiation outcome. Yes?
Jen, can the board hire a professional negotiator when they go up against the union negotiators? 'Cause I think
I'm not
one
an
of the-
expert in that, but
Well, I have some experience in it, and I think the school boards, whether they're 15 or 211, are no match with the union negotiators. Union negotiators are professionals. They know the art of negotiating. And if you just have one of our guys from the board, and they do accounting, and then they're sitting across the union negotiator, they'll make mincemeat out of our guys. So one of the things that people do is they hire a professional negotiator to represent the interests of the parents and the board.
that's interesting. Yeah.
The process check, just as a matter, we had 45 minutes, I heard, and, I have about 15 questions I've saved up already. That's a good question. I was just wondering, are we in the present and then get to a discussion point?
Yeah, we should keep on,
Okay, then
moving.
I'll hold my questions.
okay, thank you.
I'd like to make sure I get a chance to hear your framework you're
Right.
presenting before we,
Right.
thanks.
Okay, yep, so I end right there, perfect ending for me, and so I pass it off to Marcia.